Hello and welcome back to this video. In our previous video, we were able to establish a structure for working with files. Okay, we were able to look at the steps you have to take when you are working with files in general. So in this video, we are going to be working basically with text files. Okay, so now I'm going to grab a bunch of text and I'm going to insert it into a string variable. So I'm going to say the string is that. So I just grabbed a bunch of text that is talking about Python programming. So, and in our past videos, we have already learned how to escape strings in Python, right? So we can see that we have a single quote here and we already use our double quote. So assuming I use this single quote here, you can see that we'll have an issue, right? So now, and we are using a double quote. So we can use this as our string. Okay, so if we are to write these files again, we can pass in this string variable here and this text will be added to the file. Okay, so remember that our file name now is new text.txt. So now, also before I proceed, we are going to be listing out some of the file modes that we are going to be working with, and some of them include, so I'll write them out in the comments. So we have the W for write mode, the R for read mode, the A for the append mode, the W plus for write and read, the R plus for read and write, the A plus for append, read and write. So now this append mode works with the write function because when you are writing in append mode, you're also writing into the file, but you are going to, instead of writing a new file afresh, you are just appending to an existing file. Okay, so the first thing we are going to do right now is I'm going to remove this print statement because at this point we are not reading this. Okay, so we are going to write into this file. So I'm going to run this again, or better still, I'll change it to the file.txt, and I'm going to delete this new file.txt, right? So I'm going to run this again. Okay, so we have an error that says unsupported operation, that this file is not writable. Okay, that is because I'm calling the write method here and the mode is still the read mode. So when a file is in read mode, you cannot write into the file, right? Unless it is in the read plus mode. Okay, so but for now, I'm going to change it to write, and now everything works perfectly well. And as you can see, we have a new text in our file. Okay, so I'm going to change it to a read plus mode, and I'm going to create another variable and call it string2. So, and what do I want to do? I want to duplicate that content. So I'm going to paste it again. And in here, I'm going to write our formatting function, that is the F string. And inside those string quotes, I'm going to open and close our curly braces and I'll pass in the first string. So now you have double of this in string 2. Okay, so but before I start writing into the string 2, I want to create a new line. So we already learned how to escape our string. So how can we create a new line in here? We can create a new line in here by writing our backward slash and then n, right? And then in here, I'm going to change this string to string 2. So now it's no longer just this that we are going to have in our txt file. We are going to have double of that in 2 lines. Okay, so what I'm going to do is that I'm going to run this again, and now we have 2 lines of that text in our file. So, and now that we are in a read and also a write mode, we can come here and change this to read, right? So, and if we run this, oh, and we are going to remove this arguments that we passed here. So if we read this, now we have our 2 lines of Python text displayed for us. So now that our file is in read and write mode, that is read plus, we can try to also write into this file and read it at the same time. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to call the write function here. So file.write. So, and I'm going to pass in what I'm writing into the file. So I'll pass in our string 2 as usual. And I'm going to run this. So as you can see, the read function is not getting us anything. We are not able to see anything. Okay. So although the write function is here and the read function is here, but we are not seeing anything coming out on the terminal and the file is not empty. So now this will bring us to 2 to 3 other methods that we can use in our file handling. Okay. So now what is happening here is that at this point, you have just written into the file and your pointer currently is here, right? So your cursor, that is your pointer, is at the end of the file. That is why we are not seeing anything on the terminal, right? So what I can do now is that after this write function, I'm going to print something here and I'm going to use another method, and that method is file.tell. So, and this method tells you exactly where your pointer is. That is where your cursor is at the present time. So, and I'm going to save this and run. So now, this print statement is telling me that my cursor currently is at the position of 600 and the 692nd character. Okay, so that is somewhere here. So if we open our cursor, as you can see, our cursor is at the end of the file. That is where the text ended. So right now there is nothing to print. That is why we are not able to read the content of the file. So that will now introduce us to another function in file handling that is called the seek function. So I'm going to call the seek function and I'm going to say file.seek. Okay. And this function takes 2 arguments. So the first argument is where you want to move your cursor to, right? And from where. So assuming I want to move my cursor to the 5th position and from the end of the file. So this first argument takes any integer and the second argument takes 0 or 1 or 2. Okay, so when you enter 0, you are saying that I want my cursor to move to the 5th position from the beginning of the file. Okay, so if I have 0 here, I'm simply saying please move the cursor to the 5th position from the beginning of the file. And probably when I've moved it to the 5th position, I can now change the seek again, and I will say something like move this to the 5th position to where the cursor is currently. So assuming I know that the cursor is somewhere here, I can say that okay, please move it from to the 5th position to where the cursor is currently. So the last argument it takes is 2. So and if I pass in these 2 arguments, what I'm saying is please move it to the 5th position from the end of the file. All right. So now these are the 3 arguments that the last parameter takes. So but right now I'm going to pass in 0 and I'm going to just do the seek once and I'm going to pass in only 0. So this will take the cursor to the beginning of the file, that is the 0 position, right? So I am not passing in the whence and I'm only passing in the position. Okay, so and after I call this seek function and I call the read method, I should be able to see the contents of this file. So if I print this now I have the contents of the file printed for me. So the next method that we are going to be looking at is file.flush. So when you finish writing into your file, you can decide to use this file.flush method. And what this file does is that it will immediately save this your file into the hard disk, that's into your operating system. So if for any reason something happens and the program crashed before the file was saved, because the normal process would take a bit of time, like microseconds, before if it saves the file to the operating system. So if something happens before this file is saved, well, with this flush method, your file is successfully saved before the crash. Okay, so it's not so relevant, but I just thought we should touch it. So now these are the few methods that are available for you to use in your file handling, and this is the way you can work with text files. So the file modes that we talked about, we have the read, the write, the append, then the read or write mode. So this append is that something is already there in the file. So you can see that our file.txt, that we already have something in this file. So if I decide to use the append method, I will just write into the file, and it will append whatever thing I pass in into this file. And instead of this append method, I decide to use write. Remember, we already have these two items in this file. So if I write this again and run, so, okay, it's telling us that we are not able to read because this thing is in write mode. So I'm going to change it to write plus instead. So now if I run this, you can see that what we had in the file has been overwritten. So instead of giving us two lines of this Python text or two versions of this Python text, we now have one. And it means that the two texts that were in that file before no longer exist. It's just one version of it that is there. Okay. But if I write the string 2 into the file again, right, it's going to overwrite this present thing. So you can see we now have two versions of it, and the cursor position has changed as well. So now, assuming I want to add something else into this file, so I'm going to, instead of this W, I'm going to change it to append. So, and I'm going to leave it at append plus so that we can also read it. Because if I remove this now, it will give us error. So if I change this to append plus, and decide that I want to append another version of this instead of string, or I can decide to change something instead of passing in the strings. I'll just write this is a new text. Now, with this now, something else is going to be added to the end of the line. So instead of overwriting the file, it will add it to the end of the line. So now we can see this has already been added to the end of the line. So it's not overwriting it. So we are not getting the current version of this text. So I'm going to just cancel this, and I want to close it and reopen it. So don't save. And I'm going to open it again. So you can see the current version of what we have here. So now I hope you understand how this mode works. So you have the read, the write, and the append. Then if you want to be able to do two at the same time, both read and write and read, and append and read, then you should add the plus to the mode. Okay, so now in our next video, we are going to be working with CSV files, and subsequently we are going to be working with JSON files as well. So thank you so much for watching this video, and see you in the next one.